Yo, at your boy Apollos, and I'm trying to finish up a video on the philosophy of miracles and religious experiences. Unfortunately, this video may not be released until the next 3 weeks at minimum, and more likely to be so after a couple months. In the meantime though, I've got a special treat for you guys. So this presentation is one that I actually presented at a student organization at my university, and I figured, why don't I reuse this for the purposes of maintaining my YouTube channel? Minimal effort, maximal entertainment, and without delay, let's get started. Today we are going to be discussing a really popular ethical dilemma in philosophy, and I'll start off by mentioning that my inspiration for this topic came about through primarily remembering a YouTube super chat at MythVision podcast, where the YouTube presenter Jonathan M.S. Pierce responded to my theodicy of unintended consequences by questioning the concept of free will and subsequently the idea of responsibility in its truest form, as opposed to being an illusion meant to propagate the preservation of species. Other than that, I've always had a special place in my heart for the disenfranchised and the forgotten underdogs. So without further ado, let's get started. By the way, for those of you who are wondering, this over here just says the, like the word the, that's it. Our first extant reference to the scenario can be found in Philippa Foot's Problem of Abortion and the Doctrine of Double Effect, where, quote, the driveway of a runway train, which he can only steer from one narrow track onto another, 5 men are working on one track and 1 man on the other. Anyone on the track he enters is bound to be killed. In the same paragraph, she mentions another example of a magistrate framing an innocent man to satisfy the bloodthirsty crowd, as to draw a parallel of taking an act to save more lives. The image to your right is apparently authored by someone who goes by S. Lilly, but the idea is similar to the trolley problem, but instead of flicking a lever, you would be pushing a fat guy off of a bridge, whose weight would stop the trolley. Interestingly enough, poll data does show that people are less willing to push the fat guy off the bridge, as opposed to easily flicking the lever. Now, to visualize this hypothetical, you yourself are the person in blue. You can either choose to do nothing and allow 5 people to die, or switch the lever and save more lives by killing 1 person instead. To be clear, these are your only 2 options in the action space, and the answer isn't to sacrifice yourself by kamikaze bombing the train. The purpose of the question is to ask, are we morally obligated to inflict harm for the greater good? Now, I recognize part of the problem is if lives are expendable, and if killing someone necessarily constitutes as an absolute evil. And yeah, I get it, many think we are all part of a social contract to surrender our rights, hence the philosophy of death penalty convictions and selective service. But also think back to Foot's example of the magistrate of framing an innocent person or minority. Most people don't think that being accused by a mob is part of the social contract, and that they are to be assured of sovereign citizenship that is an unalienable right that cannot be violated under a deontological framework of morals and ethics. In short, I think the heart of the trolley problem is not whether human lives are expendable, but rather if this kind of lesser of 2 evils is a justified philosophy. So, ethical frameworks. There are plenty of ethical frameworks that have been used to respond to this problem. The most simplistic way to respond is under a utilitarian framework, to save as many lives as possible. Whether you think it's justified to actively inflict harm on an innocent bystander, to save more lives, from a purely utilitarian perspective, personal moral agency is not the highest virtue, but rather the consequences of moral actions. In this case, the consequences of those actions are being judged by how many lives are saved. Then there's the idea that we are responsible for mostly the personal agency of our moral actions. This is where we would bring in Christian virtue ethics, for example. It's really hard to justify utilitarianism when Jesus says things like, I will save the 1 lost sheep at the risk and expense of the well-being of the 99 ones who are already righteous and saved. And where Paul, the apostle, also says things like, shall we do evil so that grace may abound? By no means. There is the idea that we are primarily responsible for the personal agency of our moral actions. The doctrine of double effect, for instance, divides an action into 2 useful categories, intent and foresight. There is more to us than just saving lives. There must be personal investment into an action for it to be counted as a noble act by the person under the view. Surprisingly, there actually is a third option that appeals to the incommensurability, quote-unquote, of human lives. It claims that not only is there no meaningful agency in the option to do nothing, but also in the option to flick the lever. Therefore, there is no moral responsibility on the part of the bystander. I really like the way that Renix and Robinson put it. Down here I have a quote. If I'm forced against my will into a situation where people will die, and I have no ability to stop it, how is my choice a moral choice between meaningfully different options, as opposed to a horror show that I've been thrust into, in which I have no meaningful agency at all? Now with utilitarianism and how it comes in its many forms. Now there was a whole page dedicated to much of utilitarianism material that I'm just simply not going to go over in the interest of time. But utilitarianisms themselves disagree with how to measure utility with respect to weighing a lesser of two evils. So, first off, what exactly are we measuring? Well, should we be maximizing the utility for ourselves? Or everyone except ourselves? Or just all people in general? I would argue that altruism, to give one's life for everyone else's sake, would be the Christian perspective, given the various biblical texts that adhere to abstinence of personal desires for the sake of the well-being of others. Asceticism, if you would. Under utilitarianism, whether or not you agree with this statement, it simply puts to rest the idea of unintentional and unintended moral consequences. So in other words, intention, desires, these things are not things that the utilitarian are usually concerned with when it comes to maximizing the well-being of all peoples. Usually they're concerned with the consequences of those actions. Proponents of utilitarianism have disagreed on a number of points. There is act utilitarianism, where actions are judged based on likely results. Rule utilitarianism, agents should conform to broad rules that maximize utility. Total utilitarianism, the utility of everyone in the moral situation in any given state. Average utilitarianism, or social minimum, the utility of the people worst off. So then, how does this affect the trolley problem when babies, the elderly, the physically or mentally disabled, are matched against any number of functionally average adults? What if yourself or a significant loved one was on the line? How would you respond? What about monetary assets or resources? These are things to take into account whenever someone encounters some sort of trolley-like problem of the lesser of two evils. Different responses for two similar problems. Now the solutions brought forth by Thompson and even Foote herself, the primary conceiver of this problem, they do feel a bit misused and arbitrary. I do resonate with the conceptual philosophy that they present, although I don't like to use terms such as new or positive negative duties, but agency. However, I do have a problem with these frameworks, practically speaking. Let me explain. Foote conceives of the problem as a conflict between two negative duties. Negative duties are our obligation to refrain from harming others, where positive duties are our obligation to actively do good, in this case, that is to save lives. Foote formulates the footbridge problem, where you push the fat man off the bridge as opposed to flicking a lever, as a conflict between a positive and a negative duty. Paradoxically, she chooses not to push the man. In the trolley problem, however, she would flick the lever of the train to kill 4 less people. But the thing is, I don't think these duties are necessarily categorically opposed. Is it not true, for example, that switching the lever constitutes a positive duty in saving more lives? Judith J. Thompson takes another perspective, where she says that a new threat is introduced in the footbridge problem, whereas the trolley problem, it is already pre-existent, no added threat, in which case you would formulate your positive and negative duties with different degrees of agency. Now ultimately, these authors would say yes, pushing a button or flicking a lever to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima isn't the same thing as slaughtering each Hiroshima citizen individually to end World War II, but I disagree. I do think under their framework it is better to assign the lever to a positive duty, because the act of flicking the lever is heavily dependent and contingent, in fact, on the existence of the agent and his action. Therefore, there is clear agency in that scenario as opposed to doing nothing, which does not require the existence of a bystander. but that's just my humble opinion on how to properly quantify it. So, the trolley problem in art and TV shows, particularly the Fate anime series. So you guys probably didn't grow up watching the Fate anime series, but Fate Zero in particular, the first in the canonical timeline, is a great tragedy of the clash of ideological frameworks that many of the main characters in the battle for the Holy Grail personify. Hedonism, utilitarianism, idealism when it comes to deontological virtues. I think the reason it isn't as super famous like One Piece or Naruto is because the dialogue is misunderstood and underappreciated. Low-key, if there's any psychological backstory why I'm biased against utilitarianism, it's this anime show I watched when I was 14. But yeah, the idea of the show is that for one reason or another, each character is fighting for the Holy Grail, a magical artifact that can grant you one wish that is only achieved by slaughtering all the other servants in the Holy Grail War. So this guy in black interrupted a chivalrous fight with this knightly heroic spirit, and the knight over here was visibly pissed after figuring out the lengths by which Kiritsugu will go in order to accomplish getting the Holy Grail. After threatening to kill his defenseless loved ones, he kills them anyway. So joke's on Kiritsugu, because at the end of the series, it turns out the Holy Grail is not really an omnipotent wish granter, but instead corrupt by implementing his ideal for world peace. It attempts to bring into reality Kiritsugu's own philosophy of killing anyone for the sake of the majority, including the innocent, his family and friends, his loved ones, including his wife Airi, and never getting to see his own child, Ilya. And the Holy Grail starts killing countless amounts of people indiscriminately. He ends up abandoning his utilitarian ideals of a hero of justice, or should I say, Seigi no Mikata. And in the midst of the fire, he cries tears of joy over finally doing something good in his life of being a killer of the lesser of two evils, and that is saving a child. Yes, it's true that ultimately in the long run, he ended up killing so many people throughout his lifetime, in fact, tipping over the scales of the greater of two evils instead of the lesser. But that one child whom he saves is his final redemption after all the wrong that he has done at the end of the tragedy. Good stuff, good stuff. Alright, but what about psychology and poll surveys? What does quantitative data have to tell us about what degree of agency we are responsible for when it comes to the trolley problem and the lesser of two evils? So 90% of respondents to surveys regarding this moral hypothetical chose to kill the one to save the five in this scenario. If the situation was modified where the one sacrificed for the five was a relative or romantic partner, respondents are much less likely to be willing to sacrifice one life. The majority of professional philosophers exhibit a weaker majority as opposed to strong consensus from indiscriminate polls. Interestingly enough, Michael Stevens, AV Sauce Michael here, did a social experiment where he actually put people into a trolley-like problem, and it was the case that most participants did not flick the lever. The implication of these datasets, if any implications are warranted, are clear in that they suggest that once again, it's one thing to quickly deliberate and think we would act a certain way, versus actually bringing the thought to its completion and conducting that morally charged action without hesitation. So the psychology does certainly seem to suggest that personal dilemmas, like pushing a man off of a footbridge, as opposed to impersonal dilemmas, like diverting the trolley by flipping a switch, are engaged with different neurological regions associated with emotion or controlled reasoning. It's almost like how in MBTI you have thinking versus feeling, although I tend to favor terms such as personal and impersonal. Actions that are evaluated based on how they affect people versus inanimate processes and abilities and systems. On these grounds, they advocate for the dual process for moral decision making. Other studies employ trolley problems to study moral judgment, investigating topics like the role and influence of stress on the person who is conducting the trolley problem, the emotional state of any person, including the people who are trapped in the trolley problem, impression management, are there probabilities associated, levels of anonymity, different types of brain damage, and let me add over here also disabilities in terms of trying to evaluate the utilitarian aspect of things, physiological arousal, how much pain is involved when someone is killed, different neurotransmitters. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what I meant by that when I wrote this PowerPoint. Genetic factors on response to trolley problems. Different ways in which we are neurologically wired may impact how we respond to the trolley problem. So application, real life examples. So the doctrine of double effect is frequently cited in cases of pregnancy and indirect abortion. In the medical field, this doctrine is often employed so that people who do not personally believe that abortion is a morally acceptable choice may in fact remove the uterus of fallopian tubes of a pregnant woman, knowing that the procedure will cause the death of the embryo or the fetus. Examples include aggressive uterine cancer and ectopic pregnancy, which will cause the death of the embryo in the case in which the woman is certain to die without the procedure. The intended effect is to save the woman's life, not to terminate the pregnancy, and the effect of not performing the procedure would result in the greater evil of the death of both the mother and the fetus. In this case, this is not trying to say that abortion is right or wrong, but rather that the mother is going to die anyway with the child, so why bother trying to have her give birth? I do not think that the level of agency, foresight, or intent can be neglected in the scenario where you are the operator performing the abortion. Whether or not abortion is wrong or right given different circumstances, I don't think this particular reason works for trying to justify an abortion. Regarding terminally ill patients and euthanasia, medical aid in dying, etc., a principle of double effect death could be applied to justify the deliberate administration of a painkiller in potentially unsafe doses, and the intent is not to end life, but to relieve the pain suffered as it is considered harmful to the patient. Another type of death. 2 deaths. The U.S. Supreme Court has voiced support for this principle in its deliberations over the constitutionality of medical aid in dying in Vacco versus Quill. So, there have been criticisms of the trolley problem in philosophical discussion. In the Social and Personality Psychology Compass journal, researchers criticized the use of the trolley problem. The scenario it presents is too extreme and unconnected to real life to be useful or educational. So actually there was a real-life trolley problem. An actual case approximating the trolley driver dilemma occurred in June 20 of 2003. So in the articles I quickly browsed, it seems nobody was charged with murder, probably because nobody actually died, but suffered minor injuries, whatever that means, including a pregnant woman in one of the houses who managed to escape through a window and avoided serious injury from the lumber and steel train wheels that fell around her. So that's it. That's the trolley problem. I hope you guys enjoyed what you guys saw. And the next thing I have in store for us is something a bit fun. We're gonna be going over absurd trolley problems. I'll be walking you through my reasoning process of how I choose to reason with these different types of trolley problems. So, I am a virtue ethicist. I'm a Christian who abides by the New Testament. It's hard to justify utilitarianism by New Testament standards, where Jesus roughly says, I will expend the well-being of 99 righteous people who are already saved in order to save the one lost sheep. And Paul says things like, should we sin so that grace may abound? By no means. So, yes, I will choose not to do anything. I'm not a deontological ethicist, though, where deontological ethics basically was formulated by Immanuel Kant, and he basically said that there are universal laws that apply in any given situation that constitutes as moral wrong. So, for example, like lying will always be wrong. Whereas the virtue ethicist would say something like, there are characteristics of a good intent, of a good character, patience, love, kindness, self-control, things like that. And we don't measure things based off of consequences, but rather of qualities, whether something is qualitatively right or wrong. There are no universal laws that apply to any situation. It's just a matter of the attributes of that moral situation and decision. So I'll choose to do nothing. For people instead, I'll still do nothing. So I'm assuming this problem, as opposed to killing just one person, it's either trying to gauge at how you're trying to calculate utilitarianism. There might be a question of whether you are legally responsible for the murder. I believe you would be legally responsible if the situation does occur where you do flick the lever. Granted, of course, that the persons that failed to prevent this situation wouldn't be responsible themselves. But even so, like, if you would be responsible for one death, would you want to be responsible for 4? You know? And in either case, I just think that participating in murder is categorically wrong, no matter how many people. Murder, I should clarify, is unjustifiably take the life of another. So I just had this thought in mind right now, so the reason why we kill people in wars and try to defend our homeland and have the death penalty is a matter of a purely social contract and protecting our society. I still think, even in that sense, we would measure utility based off of trying to protect our virtues. Yeah, I would still choose to do nothing. Ooh, so your entire life savings on the line. I do think it is right to say that under a Christian perspective that people are primarily of uttermost importance, so I will choose to pull the lever to sacrifice my life savings to prevent the death of 5 people. And that's not murder. I'm not murdering myself. I'm freely choosing to give an altruistic aspect. Altruistic means everything except the self in order to save 5 people. Actually, I take that back, because I'm not responsible for these 5 people's deaths. So, like, hear me out. I choose not to become a doctor. I'm not murdering people that I could have possibly saved. But then again, like, do I know these people? Like, I'd gladly sacrifice my life savings to save 5 of my closest loved ones. But if it was just 5 random people, I guess I would do nothing. That ain't my problem, boy. Versus the original copy of Mona Lisa. This now is dealing with someone else's work. I suppose someone could reason out that it would be, quote-unquote, their entire life savings. It's not the Mona Lisa's painter's intent to try to save lives. But once again, I do not personally put that much value in art. Things like the Mona Lisa can always be created. I do not see much value in trying to maintain the original copy of the Mona Lisa if we can make copies that evoke the same emotions, which is basically what art is meant to do. So I would pull the lever, but Mona Lisa, again, is not a person, so it doesn't count as anything. Categorically wrong. At the end of the day, inanimate objects are meant to serve people.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
I guess I would do nothing. That ain't my problem, boy. I suppose someone could reason out that it would be, quote-unquote, their entire life savings. That ain't my problem, boy. Their entire life savings. That ain't my problem, boy.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Hold up. Something ain't right. Then I start to taste them. I say.
So people will always be at the forefront need of everything. So the rich man offers me $500,000 to pull the lever. Yeah, so this guy's basically asking me to murder for $500,000. No, I would do nothing.
Would you step on this puppy for $18 billion? There's no sugarcoating this. I would kill it. Are you kidding me? I would smash the living out of that. I would not have any regrets. I would look at its disfigured face as I'm doing it, and I'd just be thinking about that $18 billion, baby. I would, without it, for $18 billion, I would tape that my foot and just slam it against the treadmill.
In fact, it might be even argued that such a person, a rich man, was worthy of death. That person needed to die because they had spent that much money to murder, so, like, yeah. 5 lobsters versus a cat. So, the thing is, my philosophy when it comes to animal sentience is that they're symbolic, they embody characteristics of a human being, that we must be good caretakers for these. They are subservient to us, but we are not to abuse them. And personally, I don't find that much value in 5 lobsters versus a cat, so I'd do nothing. So 5 people who are sleeping and won't feel pain versus killing 1 person. So yeah, I would do nothing. That's just even more reason for me to do nothing, as a matter of fact, but I suppose, like, under a utilitarian perspective, that might change some people's minds. Killing 1 person who accidentally tripped onto the track, so that just makes them more innocent in my opinion, so I would continue to do nothing. So for both scenarios, it seems to be the case that people feel less pain, but regardless, murder is murder, so I'm not gonna choose to partake in that a trolley is headed towards one guy, you can pull the lever to divert it to the other track, but your Amazon package would be late. Well, yeah, like, yeah, personally, like, I'm not responsible for this situation.
Bruh.
You know, at this point, I'd miss out on a great opportunity to save a life versus sacrificing my Amazon package. So in this case, the value that is lost is of mine, so it's totally my decision whether or not I choose to sacrifice my Amazon package to save a life. And in that case, I would pull the lever, because once again, inanimate objects don't amount to human beings. Best friend versus 5 strangers. Okay. So, yeah, this one's actually a bit hard for me because I do think it is right to say, even as a Christian, that even though all lives are equal under a societal framework, that we are more responsible for family and friends that we are in closer proximity to. We don't get the chance to express love, kindness, patience, and all that to everyone in the world, only just a few people. There's a limited amount of that emotional energy to go around, realistically. But would I kill 5 people to save my best friend? I unfortunately would not, so I'd do nothing. 5 elderly people versus a baby, bro, chill out. So I do think I would not kill a baby to save 5 elderly people. Anyway, even under a utilitarian perspective, those 5 elderly people's lives are over, practically speaking. So I would once again do nothing and allow the 5 elderly people to die. 5 identical clones of me. I can sacrifice me to save 5 clones. So I personally think that clones are still people if we do manage to get the technology to make clones, because clones do not have the same experiences. They do not have the same life. They might all be genetically the same, identical to me in that respect, but just having the same genetics doesn't guarantee you to develop into the same person you are, mentally, physiologically, psychologically, whatever, spiritually. I guess I would pull the lever to sacrifice myself. Once again, Christian altruism taking its course. 50% chance of allowing 2 people to die versus 10% chance of killing 10 people. Okay. So regardless, so this one I do have to think out, because yes, I guess there's a chance I could be 10%. 10% is kind of small, but at the heart of the question, I can see what it is saying. So, like, if there was 0.1% chance of killing 1,000 people, then I would choose that option, versus, like, a 50% chance of killing 2 people. But regardless, I still think both of these percentages are of considerable probability, so I would choose to actually do nothing. I would not take the chance of being morally responsible. Utilitarians are probably laughing at me right now just because of so much thought I'm putting into this, so that's the props I will give to utilitarianism. I don't think it's right though, but I do think it's much easier to calculate. 5 sentient robots versus 1 human. So I am of the perspective that AI can become sentient, because what we value in a human being can end up in a robot. Theoretically though, I don't think we have reached that level. Like, Siri ain't gonna be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. So, because I would not murder a human being to save 5 robots, no matter how advanced. Okay, so now we're dealing with inanimate objects here. Would I want to be responsible for damaging a trolley? Then 3 trolleys of the same value, but there are 3 of them, so it would be 3 times the collateral damage if I choose to do nothing. I guess the question really boils down to, is it categorically wrong to destroy property to save more property or something like that? I guess the issue over here would be whether someone owns any of these. Would I be damaging someone's property or life savings, for example? In which case, I don't want to be responsible for that. But I don't get that vibe from this question. I just kind of like see that, oh, you're just dealing with actions that are worth more than the other. While I do think it's categorically wrong to damage someone else's economic value, when it comes to nobody owning it, you would obviously pick the lesser of the damages. So I would pull the lever to destroy the $300,000 trolley. Releasing 100,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide, which will kill 5 people over 30 years. When nothing is on the line, when no lives are on the line, no personal damages are on the line, I do think it is the onus on the moral agent to use his resources to conduct the most effective action. That doesn't mean that everyone has to become doctors, it just means that you use your talents and abilities to play your part in society, you know? So I would choose to pull the lever and destroy the trolley, assuming no one's in there. 100,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. I don't know how that scales, by the way. Wow, 59%? Oh, wow. Like, what are the 41% here thinking? I'm actually surprised by that statistic. Oh no, you're reincarnated, who will eventually be reincarnated as every person in this classic trolley problem. What will you do? Basically, what this amounts to is, how much pain do I want to receive, right? I think people can misassess this problem by thinking that these are separate people, but at the end of the day, like, it's still me. Now, I guess in other Eastern religions, it can be conceived of once you are reincarnated, you are a totally different person or something like that, but I think it's more practical to think of this problem as, how much pain do I want to receive? So I would pull this lever, bite the bullet now. Okay, so both of these options, like, don't, like, do anything, but only, like, prank the trolley driver. Would I be responsible for causing misdemeanors in public? I do have, like, humorous heart. I like to humor my brother and tease him, for instance, even at the cost of a little bit of respect. You know, when it comes to an actual trolley, I could actually be, you know, disrupting schedules and stuff like that, so I'd do nothing. Good citizen versus bad citizen. I do believe in the death penalty and execution, so it really just depends on how bad. If it's just a little bit of bad, I'm not gonna participate in this whole situation of deciding who lives and who dies. But if it's categorically bad, then I will pull the lever. So yeah, I would take the opportunity to be judge and executioner on this one. My worst enemy. For context, like, my worst enemies are usually, like, issues and, like, personal things, arguments that I end up with people that really offend me to a point that I wish they were dead. It isn't, like, Al-Qaeda or anything like that. Those are other people's, like, personal enemies that they deal with on a daily basis. But would I allow my worst enemy to die? We shouldn't be judge and executioner of a lot of things. We should have a lot of skepticism when it comes to societal proclamations of execution and punishments in general. So I would pull the lever to save my worst enemy, even though I'm not responsible. And would I go out of my way to save my worst enemy? If it's just as simple as, like, flicking a lever, then why not, I suppose? Lower the lifespan by 50 years, 5 people by 10 years each by flicking the lever. 50 years is a lot, even if it's distributed amongst, like, 5 people, which in that case it would end up being 10 years. If it were, like, I don't know, like 50 people in 1 year, then maybe I would pull the lever, but I would not choose to lower the lifespan of 5 people by 10 years in order to save someone's lifespan by 50 years. So I would do nothing. Or has everything been predetermined since the universe began? So I'm a compatibilist in terms of philosophies. I think I do have a choice. I think we do have, like, moral agency when it comes to things like this. So I have a choice. Kill count 70. You have solved philosophy. Correction. I allowed 70 people to die. I wasn't responsible for any of that. Okay. Yeah, that's absurd trolley problems. I'll drop the link in the description below. And I hope you guys had some fun in this video. Stay tuned for more things, probably more relevant to Christian apologetics, as opposed to just generic ethics and philosophy. But I didn't want to, like, drop a video just to keep this channel, like, maintained. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. At your boy Apollo's Christian Apologetics. Peace.
For 18 billion, I would attach it to a rope and just smack it. It probably doesn't even have memories yet. And if it does, the only thing it'll remember is my foot. Time to put on the old Timberlands, you know what I'm saying? I'm not crazy, right? Using that $18 billion, I can donate maybe 1 or 2 million to, like, some World Puppy Foundation. I could buy a breeding farm and raise billions of puppies to make up for that one loss. In fact, only good can come from smashing the this thing. There is nothing altruistic about it. You know, I probably wouldn't even donate any money. I'd just fucking do it. Even if I was Dr. Dolittle and that thing was begging me to stop and I could hear it, I'd still do it. $18 billion? Come on, dude. I would do what those crazy doctors did back in the day. I'd do some crazy